The kafala system. It is a labor sponsorship framework used heavily in Arab Gulf states like Qatar to manage millions of migrant workers. The practice started back in the 1950s when the discovery of oil created a massive demand for cheap, foreign labor. Here is how it actually works. A local citizen or company acts as a sponsor for a foreign worker. Once the worker arrives, the employer almost always takes their passport. Under this setup, the worker becomes legally tied to that specific boss. If they want to change jobs or even leave the country, they need their employer's written permission. You end up with a workforce that is completely trapped. Employers can withhold pay, force people to work in dangerous heat, or cram them into terrible living conditions, and the workers cannot just quit and go home. Even though Qatar introduced legal reforms in 2020 to try and dismantle the system, many employers still exploit loopholes, meaning this form of modern slavery remains a very real problem today. Extreme heat exposure. When Qatar won the bid to host the 2022 World Cup, they had to build massive stadiums from scratch. To get it done in time, migrant workers spent hours outside in the brutal desert summer. Temperatures regularly climbed past 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Workers poured concrete, climbed scaffolding, and hauled heavy metal under the blazing sun. There was little shade, and companies often failed to provide enough cold water or proper places to rest. The human body just cannot handle that kind of prolonged stress. Sweating stops, organs struggle, and the heart works overtime to cool the blood. Countless healthy young men collapsed on the job. Many suffered fatal cardiac arrests or deadly heat stroke, while others developed chronic kidney disease from constant dehydration. Even though the tournament is over, those families are still grieving. It stands as a harsh reminder of what happens when human lives are treated as disposable to meet a construction deadline. Systemic wage theft. This is when companies routinely cheat workers out of their hard-earned money. Let us look at exactly how it works. A worker in a place like Nepal or Bangladesh pays an illegal recruitment fee to an agent just to get a job overseas. This fee is often between $1,000 and $3,000. The worker takes out a massive loan with high interest to pay it. They arrive at the construction site already drowning in debt. Then, the employer simply stops paying them. The bosses hold on to the paychecks for months at a time, claiming cash flow problems or just ignoring the workers completely. You see exhausted men working 12-hour shifts in the blistering heat, unable to buy extra food or send a single dime to their families. They are trapped in crowded labor camps because they cannot afford a plane ticket out. This cycle of debt and stolen paychecks still powers modern construction booms globally, building massive city skylines at the heavy cost of human freedom. Forced favela evictions. When Brazil prepared to host the 2014 World Cup, the government needed room for massive new stadiums, roads, and parking lots. They found that space in the favelas, the country's densely packed, working-class neighborhoods. Officials would simply show up, spray paint numbers on people's doors, and give them just days to leave. Soon after, the bulldozers rolled in. Heavy machinery tore down houses block by block, turning entire communities into flat dirt. The families living there were forced out. They were usually offered tiny cash payouts that could never buy a new home, or they were sent to public housing hours away from their jobs. Across Brazil, an estimated 170,000 people lost their homes, or were threatened with eviction for the games. The immediate result was a handful of shiny new sports arenas standing right where neighborhoods used to be. It still matters today, because many of those expensive stadiums quickly fell into disrepair, while the families who were displaced never got their homes back. North Korean labor camps. This is a system where the North Korean government exports its own citizens to do heavy manual labor in other countries. Leading up to the 2018 World Cup, Russia needed to build massive stadiums fast. To get it done, North Korea sent workers to construction sites like the Zenit Arena in St. Petersburg. These men worked grueling shifts around the clock in the freezing cold. They lived right on the construction sites in cramped, dirty shipping containers. But the workers never actually saw the money they earned. The North Korean regime seized almost all their wages, funneling millions of dollars straight back to Pyongyang to fund the state. The men were left trapped, exhausted, and hungry, essentially functioning as modern-day slaves building a global sports stage. Even though international sanctions eventually ordered these workers to be sent home, The practice shows exactly how far the regime will go to squeeze money from its own people to keep itself afloat. Fatal construction accidents. This is about the deadly reality of building massive stadiums and infrastructure for global events. When nations win bids to host things like the World Cup, they rush to build. In places like Qatar leading up to the 2022 tournament, hundreds of thousands of migrant workers were brought in to do the heavy lifting. The work happens at breakneck speed with very little safety oversight. Workers are frequently sent high up on scaffolding without proper harnesses or netting. Heavy cranes lift massive steel beams right over crowded work areas. The result is a steady stream of preventable tragedies. Men lose their footing and fall to the ground. Overloaded cranes collapse and crush the people working below them. Reports estimate that over 6,000 migrant workers died in the decade leading up to the Games. It matters because behind every shiny new mega stadium is a massive human cost, reminding us that basic worker safety is still treated as an unnecessary luxury. White elephant stadiums. These are massive billion-dollar sports venues built for a single global event and then essentially abandoned. When a country hosts a mega tournament like the World Cup, the government pours public money into constructing state-of-the-art arenas. The idea is to dazzle the world for a few weeks. But once the fans pack up and the cameras leave, the reality sets in. Look at South Africa's 2010 World Cup. They spent over $1 billion on new and upgraded stadiums. Today, venues like the Cape Town Stadium cost millions a year just to maintain, sitting empty most of the time. The 2014 tournament in Brazil tells the same story. The Arena da Amazônia in Manaus cost around $300 million for just 4 games. Now, the paint peels and the pitch dies. Another billion-dollar Brazilian stadium was literally used as a parking lot for city buses. This matters because cities are left paying off colossal debts for rotting concrete bowls, draining money away from schools, hospitals, and local economies that desperately need it. Amazon rainforest destruction. In 2014, Brazil hosted the World Cup and built the Arena da Amazônia, right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. To build a 44,000-seat mega stadium in a remote city like Manaus, construction crews had to clear surrounding land and bring in massive amounts of supplies. Because there are hardly any roads leading into the city, ships had to transport heavy materials up the Amazon River. The massive steel roof sections even traveled all the way across the ocean from Portugal. This logistical nightmare created an enormous carbon footprint. The heavy machinery and river traffic disrupted local wildlife, polluted the waterways, and poured exhaust into the air. Today, the stadium sits mostly empty, a giant concrete bowl baking in the jungle sun. It stands as a stark reminder of how building giant, temporary entertainment spaces in fragile ecosystems causes lasting ecological damage for very little long-term benefit. Construction contract bribery. This is the quiet exchange of illegal money between massive building companies and the government officials who hire them. When a city decides to build a huge project, like a stadium for a global sporting event, officials take bids from private construction firms. Instead of picking the fairest price, corrupt politicians give the job to companies that secretly promise them a cut of the money. To hide the stolen cash, the builders just rewrite the math. They artificially inflate the cost of concrete, steel, and labor. For instance, during the lead-up to the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, construction giants formed cartels to rig the bids. The cost of Brasilia's stadium skyrocketed from its original $300 million estimate to nearly $1 billion just to cover these massive kickbacks. As a result, taxpayers end up footing the bill for massively overpriced arenas while public funds drain away. This still matters today because every stolen dollar is money taken directly away from local schools, hospitals, and roads. Silencing investigative journalists. This is the organized effort by host nations to keep a lid on the dark side of their mega projects. When a country uses exploited labor to build stadiums, they do not want you to see it. The process is simple and aggressive. When reporters or human rights workers arrive to document worker conditions, state security tails them. If they get too close to the labor camps, police swoop in. Cameras are seized, footage is wiped, and journalists are thrown in jail or deported. We saw this in Qatar before the 2022 World Cup. In 2015, a BBC crew was arrested and held for 2 days just for trying to film worker housing. In 2021, two Norwegian reporters were locked up for over 30 hours doing the same thing. The visible effect is a chilling media blackout where only shiny, state-approved images make it out. This matters because without independent eyes on the ground, human rights abuses continue unchecked in the shadows of our biggest global celebrations.